You know that feeling. You land somewhere new, and just little everyday things feel different. Not bad necessarily, just kind of surprising sometimes. Like how you get coffee, or I don't know, how people cross the street.
Yeah, those little moments that make you pause and go, huh, okay.
Exactly. Well, today we're diving right into those. This deep dive is all about culture shock in the USA 5 things that shock tourists.
Right.
We've looked at what really tends to surprise folks visiting the States. The goal here is to give you a shortcut, basically, to understanding these common shocks.
And it's really about pulling out the key insights, getting you clued in on these cultural quirks. Super useful if you're planning a trip or maybe studying there.
Or even if you're just curious about American culture.
Definitely. Let's get into it.
Okay, so the first thing that jumped out with the sources was cars. Just how much American life seems built around the car.
Ah, yes.
Like even for a tiny trip, a 2-minute drive to the grocery store, that sounds, well, kind of wild compared to places where you just walk or bike, right?
It really does. And there's a reason for it mostly.
Yeah.
The U.S. is just vast. And outside a few big cities, your New Yorks, your Chicagos, public transport often isn't great.
Right.
So schools, malls, workplaces, they're all pretty spread out. A car becomes less of a luxury and more of a necessity.
So tourists might show up expecting to walk places.
And find they actually need a car, yeah. Even for basic errands sometimes. It catches people off guard.
Okay, so for you listening, if you're picturing yourself strolling everywhere, maybe rethink that slightly.
Yeah.
You'll need to factor in transport costs, car rental, ride shares, that sort of thing.
Good advice.
All right, moving on from getting around. Let's talk about people, how Americans interact. The sources mention this idea of being friendly but not close.
That's a common observation.
You get these really warm greetings, right? Big smiles. Hi, how are you?
Hmm.
Maybe someone compliments your shoes out of the blue.
Yeah, very open initially.
But then apparently that initial warmth doesn't always turn into a deep friendship. People mention hearing, let's hang out sometime. And then poof, nothing happens.
It's this concept of surface friendliness. And it's not meant to be insincere exactly. It's more like a social lubricant, a way to have pleasant, low-stakes interactions.
Okay.
It's warm, it's polite, it's welcoming, but building actual close friendships, that still takes time and effort just like anywhere else. It's just the start that feels maybe different.
Right, so it's not rudeness, just a cultural difference in how things kick off.
Precisely.
And honestly, that upfront friendliness is still pretty nice, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It does make you feel welcome, even if you're not suddenly best buds.
Absolutely. It's a positive aspect.
Okay, from warm greetings to something potentially quite cold. This one comes up a lot. Ice and air conditioning.
Ha! Yes. The extremes.
People are shocked by the amount of ice in drinks. Like cups just packed with ice, with only a splash of soda or whatever.
The ice-to-liquid ratio can be surprising.
And then there's the AC. You walk inside in the middle of summer, and it's freezing, like actually cold. Why is it Arctic indoors when it's boiling outside?
Well, the sources suggest it ties into this American idea of comfort, sometimes taken maybe a bit far.
Like comfort equals maximum cold.
Sort of, yeah. There seems to be this desire to feel extra cool, both literally and maybe figuratively. It's about environmental control, maybe even a bit of luxury.
Interesting. So practical tip for you, the listener.
Always carry a sweater.
Always carry a sweater. Even in August, you might need it indoors.
Solid advice.
Okay, next up, something that trips up a lot of visitors is money. Specifically, the price you see versus the price you pay.
Ah, the sticker shock after the sticker price.
Exactly. You see a burger listed for, say, $10. Seems reasonable. But then the bill comes and it's like $12.50 or $30. What's that about?
Right. There are two main things going on there. First is sales tax. Unlike many countries, the price displayed on the shelf or menu doesn't include sales tax. That gets added on at the very end, at the checkout or on the final bill.
Gotcha. And the second thing?
Tipping. This is a big one. In the U.S., tipping, especially in restaurants and for services, is basically expected, usually around 15% to 20% of the bill.
And it's not really optional, is it?
Not really, no. It's a huge part of how service workers earn their wages. It's just deeply embedded in the culture, which is, again, quite different from many places where tax is included and tipping is less common or smaller.
So, super important advice for you. When you're budgeting for meals, drinks, haircuts, whatever, you have to mentally add on that tax and tip.
Definitely. Factor it in or you'll be in for a surprise.
All right, our final point. This one's maybe a bit more personal. It's about public toilets.
Oh boy, the stall gaps?
Yes. The gaps. Visitors are often really taken aback by the gaps around the stall doors,
Yeah.
at the sides and
Yeah.
especially the bottom. The reaction is often like, wait, can people see me in here? There's just not the same level of visual privacy as you find in many other countries with floor-to-ceiling doors.
It's true. And the sources mention all sorts of theories, right? Airflow, safety, maybe easier cleaning.
But does anyone actually know for sure?
Seems like.
Huh?
Not definitively. The sources kind of shrug and say it's just how it is. This sort of limited privacy is the norm there, a real contrast to what many are used to.
So for you, listener, the takeaway is just be prepared for gaps.
Pretty much. Just another cultural quirk to experience.
So wrapping this all up, I think the big theme here is that culture shock isn't really about things being good or bad.
Right.
It's just different.
Yeah.
And understanding these differences, like the ones we talked about, just makes you a bit more aware, maybe a better global citizen,
Absolutely. It broadens your perspective. And maybe that leads to a final thought for you to chew on.
Oh.
Well, beyond just making your travels easier, how might noticing these kinds of differences in the U.S. actually make you think about your own culture?
Like, what assumptions do we have?
Exactly. What does seeing their way of doing things, even small things like toilet stalls or tipping, reveal about our own ingrained habits and what we consider normal? Something to think about. Today, we're sort of taking a shortcut, really, to getting informed on something that, well, it touches everyone who's learned a language or, traveled somewhere new. We're diving into how language really unlocks understanding, especially when you step into a new culture.
Exactly. And we've got an interesting set of sources today. They're excerpts from an English learning breakdown section.
Yeah.
It's designed for B1, B2 English learners, but what's really useful, I think, is how it gives this unique window into practical English, but through observations about American customs.
Okay, so our mission here in this deep dive is basically to pull out the most important bits of knowledge from this material. We'll explore how simple things like vocabulary and grammar points, when you see them in context, can actually reveal some profound cultural insights and hopefully equip you for real-world conversations.
Yeah, avoid those lost in translation moments. We'll look at specific words, grammar structures, even common mistakes highlighted in these sources, and show you not just what they are, but I guess why they matter for fluency and understanding.
Okay, let's start unpacking this, maybe with some of the key vocabulary. Because the sources highlight words that aren't just definitions, they feel more like cultural keys. Like tourist, we all know what it means, right? But the source uses it to point out a disconnect. It says, many tourists are surprised by American customs.
It immediately signals that difference between local norms and visitor expectations. That's where the insights start, really.
Yeah.
And that connects directly to another term they bring up, culture shock.
Right, that feeling of disorientation.
Yeah, exactly. The example they give, he experienced culture shock when he saw American tipping culture. It's not just defining the term. It's kind of preparing you for a pretty common, sometimes unsettling emotional reaction. It makes you think, well, why does tipping cause that feeling for some people?
Absolutely. And it's not always these huge concepts either. Some details seem small but carry a lot of weight, like surface level. The source uses it for interactions. The conversation felt nice, but it was surface level.
Interesting. What does that suggest?
Well, it kind of hints at a certain style of friendliness, maybe common in some places, where that initial warmth doesn't automatically mean deep connection. It's a subtle thing, but important.
Very true. And then there's tipping itself. The sources don't just define it as, giving extra money. They frame it as a strong cultural expectation. Don't forget, tipping is expected in U.S. restaurants.
Right. Almost non-negotiable in certain settings.
Exactly. And that points to a whole system, doesn't it? The service industry, compensation, things that are just really different depending on where you are in the world. It's one word, but it opens up this whole economic and social dynamic.
Or think about privacy. The example they use is kind of funny. The bathroom had no privacy because of the gaps in the stall.
Yeah, I saw that one.
What does that tiny detail suggest about maybe broader cultural ideas about personal space, perhaps, individualism, maybe, architectural choices sometimes prioritize other things over complete enclosure. It makes you question what you just assume versus what's actually customary.
That's a great point. And it leads into words like friendly, defined simply as kind and nice to others. The source says people in the U.S. are very friendly, even to strangers. But, like you said earlier, there's nuance there.
It's not always the same as close.
Right. And the sources also mention expectation, what you think will happen. Like the example, my expectation was that prices included tax, but they didn't. That's a classic mix-up, isn't it? Based entirely on different assumptions about how pricing works.
Oh, totally. That phrase they mentioned, Americans are friendly but not always close, that really struck me. I remember feeling that myself on my first trip. You have these warm chats and think, wow, new best friend, but then realize the depth might be different. How do the sources help learners navigate that? It's tricky.
Well, part of it is understanding the difference they draw between custom, like a specific tradition, it's American custom to tip waiters, and the bigger idea of culture.
Ah, okay. Culture being the whole way of life.
Exactly. Culture is the whole tapestry. Customs are individual threads. The sources use these terms to show how habits fit into the bigger picture. And ultimately, it all shapes your experience, what you actually live through and feel. Like, she had a good experience visiting America.
Wow.
These words become tools for understanding norms.
So it's not just the words themselves, but also how we structure sentences, the
Sure.
grammar.
Yeah.
That also reveals things, right? Our sources get into some key grammar points, not just for correctness, but for how they frame these cultural observations, like the present simple tense.
Yeah, that tends for facts and habits.
Right. But here, it's used to make generalizations about the culture. Things like Americans drive everywhere, or tourists often get confused by the tax. It kind of presents these as ongoing truths within that context.
It's fundamental for describing norms, those recurring things. And when the source switches to telling personal stories like Emma and Jack's
It
observations,
just shifts.
right, it shifts naturally into the past. Simple tense. For specific events, personal experiences, I visited Europe, or he felt culture shock. That's how we talk about the journey, the specific moments of discovery or, friction.
Okay. And then for advice or talking about possibilities, I mentioned modal verbs like should, could, might.
Yes, like tourists should learn local customs. Or you might feel shocked.
And notice the choice of should there. You should learn customs. It feels like strong advice, but maybe not quite a rigid rule.
That's a good observation. It often reflects a slightly more individualistic take on things, perhaps. A recommendation rather than an absolute command. It's a subtle but important nuance for giving and receiving advice in this context.
Yeah, super practical for actual conversations.
Definitely. Understanding these tenses, these modals,
Yeah.
it lets you talk about what is, what was, what should be, what might happen. Really crucial for navigating new places effectively.
Okay, so moving towards like real spoken English fluency. The sources have these phrases to practice, but they're not just random sentences, are they? They seem like common expressions that pack a lot of meaning, often summing up a cultural point.
Exactly. Think about, that's just how it is in America. What does that phrase really say?
Yeah, it sounds like acceptance, maybe a bit of resignation sometimes to certain norms you might not fully get.
Right. Or tourists don't expect that at all. That one really highlights the gap, doesn't it, between assumptions and reality. And another one, you should know this before you travel. That ties right back to the modal verbs, the advice. It's all about being prepared.
Totally. And the prices were a total surprise. That just captures such a common feeling, doesn't it? Again, hinting at those hidden taxes or unexpected costs. Using these phrases doesn't just make you sound more natural, it kind of plugs you into the mindset of someone experiencing the culture.
So how do we avoid the common slip-ups? The ones that aren't just about grammar, but can actually cause cultural misunderstandings. The sources flag some key common mistakes to avoid.
Like the sympathy versus sympathetic one.
Yeah, that's a classic adjective-noun confusion. Saying he was very sympathy instead of he was very sympathetic. It seems small, but it changes how your compassion comes across.
Oh, definitely. A subtle shift in meaning. Another one they mention is forgetting the past tense when telling a story. Saying, I felt shocked instead of I feel shocked about something that happened last week makes a big difference for clarity when you're sharing those experiences.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to a conceptual point, missing up culture and custom. The sources are clear. Culture is the big picture, the whole way of life. Custom is just one habit or tradition. Getting that distinction right is really important for talking accurately about what you observe.
Yeah, otherwise you might mistake one specific practice for, the entire society's way of thinking.
Precisely. It shows how language really shapes our perception. Are we talking about a specific behavior or a whole societal structure?
So as we sort of wrap up this deep dive, what's really standing out is how these small linguistic details, a word, a tense, a common phrase, can open up so much about cultural expectations and shared experiences. This material really highlights that language learning isn't just memorizing rules, is it? It's about seeing the world through a new lens. It forces you to think critically about your own assumptions versus what's actually customary somewhere else.
Absolutely. We've seen how understanding something like culture shock, or the difference between culture and custom, can genuinely change how you experience travel, or how getting a handle on the present, simple for facts, past simple for stories, modal verbs for advice. It just gives you so much more power to express yourself and understand others. This deep dive really shows how vital these pieces are for, well, real spoken English, for fluency, even for things like IELTS listening or just navigating daily English in a new place.
It really does emphasize that, knowledge is great, but it's most valuable when you actually understand it and can apply it. And these sources offer clear ways to do that through new words, seeing grammar in action, and even those ready-to-use phrases like, that's just how it is in America, or tourists don't expect that at all.
So what does this all mean for you, listening? Well, we'd encourage you to take these kinds of insights and actually use them. Think about how the language you use, the way you use it, shapes how you understand and experience the world, particularly when you encounter different cultures.
Yeah, it raises a really interesting question. What misunderstandings could you clear up? Or what deeper insights might you find just by looking a bit closer, looking at the specific words and grammar that shape your everyday interactions, especially when you're in a new or unfamiliar environment?
What hidden linguistic or maybe cultural insights are you potentially missing out on? Because you haven't really taken that deep dive into the everyday language swirling around you. It's definitely something to think about until next time.